This cozy mystery is full of warm courage, quick thinking, and the magic of friendship. Perfect for readers who like gentle thrills, old houses, and clever solves, it's a story about facing fears, listening closely, and caring for the world around us. The West Wing keeps its secrets, but only from those who don't know how to look.
This is The Wicklings and the Ghost of the West Wing, written by Beryl Coops.
The Wicklings and the Ghost of the West Wing, Chapter 1, The First Moan. The wind began its evening song before the sun was fully gone. It wasn't a gentle whisper, but a true autumn gale that pushed hard against the strong stone walls of Pomfret Hall. To Mary, listening from her warm bed, the sound was familiar and almost cozy. It whistled down the chimneys and made the old window frames in the east wing rattle, a friendly reminder that winter was on its way. But high up in the attic of the closed west wing, the sound felt different. To the Wicklings, who lived behind a loose piece of oak paneling, the wind was like a giant, unseen beast prowling outside their door. "It's just the wind, my dears," said Sidney, their father, poking the tiny glow of their foxfire moss lantern. "Nothing more. It always gets lively this time of year." Beatrix, their mother, stirred a pot of nettle soup on their safe enclosed stove. "Quite right," she said calmly. "It's only the house settling and the trees grumbling about the cold." The Wickling children tried to believe them. Stanley, 13 and keen to be brave, polished a bent nail he used as a tool. Poppy, 11 and very practical, mended a tiny sock. The 8-year-old twins, Mindy and Mandy, played a quiet game of knucklebones, their faces lit by the soft golden light. As the night outside grew darker, the wind grew louder. It began to moan, a long, low sound that slid down the roof tiles and slipped through the cracks around their hidden door. Mindy dropped her knucklebone. "What was that?" she whispered. "That was the wind, silly," said Stanley, though he paused his polishing to listen. "Ooh," came the sound again, followed by a sharp clatter, like pebbles thrown at a window. The whole family jumped. Beatrix's spoon stopped in the pot. Sidney tilted his head. "That wasn't just the wind," Poppy said softly. "Nonsense," said Sidney, though he didn't sound as sure. "Probably a loose slate tapping in the wind." They sat very still, listening. The attic held their breathing and the far roar of the gale. Just as they began to relax, it came again, the long, sad moan rising and falling, then the clear, metallic rattle. Ooh, clatter, clatter, clatter. This time it was clearly from the west wing below them, the part of the house shut up for years, always dark and quiet. Mandy scrambled to Beatrix and buried her face in her mother's apron. "It sounds sad," she whimpered, "and angry." Mindy joined her, and soon both twins clung to their mother. Stanley and Poppy shared a worried look. Even Sidney and Beatrix looked uneasy. "Every old house has its noises," Beatrix said, smoothing the twins' hair. "They seem louder in the dark, that's all." But Stanley wasn't convinced. "What if it's something else?" he asked, not daring to say the word in everyone's mind. "What else could it be, Stanley?" Sidney asked, trying to sound cheerful. Poppy hugged her knees. "Well," she said quietly, "Mary told us the servant stories about the old lord who built this wing. They say he never left it. They say he still walks the halls sometimes." A cold hush filled the attic. The wind gave an extra loud howl, and the moan echoed again, fainter but just as spooky. "That's only silly stories," Sidney said firmly. "Told to keep kitchen boys out of the apple cellar. There are no such things as ghosts." As he spoke, a new sound reached them. Heavy, slow footsteps on the west wing floorboards below. "Creak! Pause! Creak!" The Wicklings stared at one another, eyes wide. The steps were slow and steady, like someone or something pacing the empty, dark rooms. The wind was one thing. A loose slate was another. But footsteps? Beatrix wrapped her arms around the twins. "There is a perfectly good explanation," she whispered. "I'm sure of it." No one answered. They huddled close in the warm circle of lantern light, listening to the storm and the strange sounds below. The comfort of their attic home slipped away, and a quiet, creeping worry took its place. The first moan had been heard, and the legend of the ghost of the West Wing began to take shape in the shadows of their minds. Chapter 2, A Game of Whispers. The next morning, pale, watery sunlight slid through the dusty attic window. The storm had passed. Outside, everything was wet and shining, But inside the Wicklings' home, the worry from the night before still lingered, like the smell of old dust. The twins, Mindy and Mandy, huddled over their breakfast of crushed oat biscuit, whispering, "It was a ghost. I know it was." Mindy said, eyes wide. "I heard its feet. Crack!" "Maybe it was a friendly ghost?" Mandy asked hopefully, though she didn't sound sure. "Ghosts aren't friendly," Stanley said, trying to sound like an expert as he sharpened a stick into a spear. "They're cold and sad and moan because they've lost something. That's what the stories say." He puffed out his chest. "But they're no match for a good, sharp point." Poppy rolled her eyes. "A stick won't help against something you can't touch, Stanley. And I still think it could have been the wind. Wind makes very strange noises in big, empty rooms." Sydney and Beatrix listened to their children argue, keeping their own worries behind calm faces. "Poppy is right to be sensible," Sydney said, "but Stanley is right to be ready. Until we know what it was, we must all be extra careful." Just then, the familiar scratching signal came at their hidden door. "Mary!" The panel slid back, and her cheerful face appeared, bringing a rush of relief to the anxious attic. "Good morning," she said brightly. She held up a small, leather-bound book. "I found the most wonderful book of fairy stories in the library, and I thought we could—" She stopped when she saw their solemn faces. "What's wrong? You all look like you've seen, well, a ghost." Poppy sighed. "We might have, Mary." They all started talking at once, moans, clatters, pacing footsteps. Mary listened, her smile fading to a serious frown. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. "A ghost?" she said at last. "In the West Wing? But that's silly." "Tell that to the footsteps," Stanley muttered. Mary frowned. "Julian was saying something at breakfast. He was trying to scare Sebastian, talking about a Pomfret phantom that haunts the unused rooms." She shook her head. "I thought he was just being mean as usual. But if you heard it too—" Downstairs, in the grand dining room, Julian Pomfret was indeed enjoying himself. He was 15 and loved teasing his younger siblings, especially his lazy, daydreaming brother, Sebastian. "And they say you can hear it just after midnight," Julian said, leaning across the table toward a pale Sebastian. "A long, sorrowful moan, the sound of a soul in trouble." He took a grand bite of toast. "Then the clattering begins, like chains. And finally, the footsteps. Slow, heavy steps pacing the long gallery. Forever and ever." Sebastian, half asleep over his porridge a moment before, was now wide-eyed. Really?" he stammered. "Of course, really," Julian said. "Old Gibbs the gardener saw a pale, shining figure at the window last night. He won't go near the West Wing anymore, and neither should you." He pointed his butter knife at Sebastian and at Mary, who had just slipped into her seat. "I forbid it, for your own safety. That part of the house is dangerous." Mary stirred her porridge, thinking hard. She knew Julian was making most of it up. Old Gibbs was nearly blind and frightened of his own shadow. But the Wicklings had heard something. They didn't fancy things. If they were scared, there was a real reason. Later that morning, Mary found Julian in the hallway, bragging to a nervous housemaid about the phantom. "Julian," Mary said, cutting in, "there are no such things as ghosts." Julian scowled. "That's what you think, little sister. But mark my words, the West Wing is haunted. It's my duty as the older brother to protect you." He puffed out his chest, much like Stanley had. "I might even mount a brave investigation myself. But you and Sebastian must stay away. Understood?" Mary didn't argue. A clever idea was forming. If Julian truly believed the wing was haunted and had forbidden them to go, then he wouldn't expect to find her there. It was the perfect cover for a real investigation. She hurried back up to the attic. The Wicklings were glad to see her. "Julian is spreading the ghost story everywhere," Mary reported. "He's even forbidden us from going to the West Wing." The Wicklings looked dismayed. "But how will we find out what it is?" Poppy asked. "That's just it," Mary said, eyes sparkling. "Because he thinks it's a ghost. He won't stay there for long. And because he told us not to go, I have the perfect excuse to sneak in and investigate. We can work together. I can explore the rooms, and you can explore inside the walls. We'll be ghost hunters." The Wicklings looked at each other. The word ghost was still scary, but Mary's confidence spread like warmth. Being ghost hunters sounded much braver than being afraid of a noise. "Ghost hunters," Stanley repeated, a slow grin growing. "I like that." "Then it's settled," Mary said. "We'll make a plan. We'll need a map, and signals and courage. We will solve this mystery. We'll find out what's really making those sounds. In the attic, a new feeling began to replace the fear. It was a feeling of purpose. The game of whispers had started, but Mary and the Wicklings were no longer just listening. They were getting ready to answer back. Chapter 3. The Phantom's Domain. Julian's brave investigation turned out to be more noise than bravery. That very afternoon, he decided it was time to face the Pomfret Phantom. He marched to the main door of the west wing, a heavy oak door that was usually locked. He had taken the large iron key from a hook in the kitchen and swung it as if he were very important. A very reluctant Sebastian followed at a safe distance, ordered to carry a ghost hunting kit. It held a dusty lantern, a large, heavy dictionary, to throw at it, Julian had said, and a silver candlestick that Julian believed ghosts didn't like. Mary watched from the top of the main staircase, hidden behind a big statue of a grumpy stone griffon. She saw Julian fumble with the key. The lock ground open with a loud, rusty clunk that echoed through the quiet hall. He pushed the door, and a gust of cold, still air drifted out, smelling of dust and forgotten things. "Right," Julian said a little too loudly. "Stay close, Sebastian, and be quiet. We don't want to alert the... you know what." They disappeared inside. Mary heard Julian's voice echo faintly. "Hello? Is anyone there? We mean you no harm." She had to hold back a giggle. It was the least convincing ghost call she had ever heard. She waited a few minutes, then crept down the stairs and slipped to the slightly open door. Peeking through the crack, she saw the two boys in the grand entrance hall of the west wing. Sheets covered the furniture, making strange, lumpy shapes in the dim light. Dust motes danced in a single sunbeam that slipped through a gap in the heavy curtains. Julian tried to look brave, but his shoulders were tight. He picked up the silver candlestick and waved it. "Be gone, spirit," he called, his voice cracking. Just then, a floorboard creaked upstairs. A long, low groan, exactly what Wicklings had described. Creak! Sebastian yelped and dropped the dictionary with a deafening thud. Both boys jumped. "What was that?" Sebastian squeaked, grabbing Julian's arm. It was the house settling," Julian snapped, shaking him off, though he looked pale. "Stop being such a baby." Another sound followed, a faint metallic rattle from deeper in the wing. Clatter, clatter. That was enough for Julian. "Right, well," he said, backing toward the door. We've shown it. We're not afraid. That should keep it quiet for a while. Come along, Sebastian." He almost dragged his brother out, slammed the heavy door, and turned the key with a shaking hand. Mary ducked behind the statue again, listening to their hurried footsteps down the hall. "Did you see it?" Sebastian asked, his voice trembling. "Of course not," Julian said, trying to sound grand. "But the air was thick with its presence. Cold spots everywhere. It's definitely haunted. We are never going in there again. And you," he added, pointing at Sebastian, "are to tell everyone how brave I was." Mary smiled to herself. Julian's investigation had been a complete success, for her. Now he truly believed in the ghost. And more importantly, he was frightened. He wouldn't be back. The West Wing was now, in his mind, the Phantom's domain, which made it the perfect place for a proper secret investigation. She hurried up to the attic to tell the Wicklings. They were gathered, looking anxious. "We heard the door slam," Poppy said, "and a loud thud. What happened?" Mary told them about Julian's comical ghost hunting. The Wicklings laughed, their fear easing. The mighty phantom had been scared off by a dropped book. "So the coast is clear," Stanley said, looking relieved. "More than clear," Mary said, eyes bright. "Julian says it's off limits because it's haunted. That means we can investigate properly without anyone bothering us. We can be the real detectives." She unrolled a piece of parchment. "The first thing detectives need is a map. I'll start drawing one of the rooms. Tell me exactly where the sounds were loudest from up here. We'll mark the spots, then explore those places together." The Wicklings crowded close. Poppy pointed a tiny finger. "The moan was strongest near the big fireplace, in what you call the long gallery. The footsteps seemed to be right below us, in the room with the blue wallpaper." Mary carefully marked the spots. The mystery was no longer a scary story, whispered in the dark. It was a puzzle on a map. The Phantom's domain was no longer a place to fear, but a place to explore and understand. and together Mary and the Wicklings were the only ones brave enough to do it. Chapter 4. A Plan and a Map. With Julian's phantom story firmly set, a new energy filled the Wicklings' attic. The sneaky, creeping fear began to shrink under the bright, practical light of a plan. Mary spread her piece of parchment on the floor and weighed the corners with a smooth riverstone, a thimble, and 2 shiny buttons. "Right," Mary said, her voice firm like a captain. "We need a strategy, a proper one." The Wicklings gathered close. Tiny faces turned to the large, blank map. To them, it looked like a wide, empty world waiting for its lines. "The first rule of being a detective," Mary said, "is never to go into a mystery unprepared. We have 2 big advantages. 1, I can explore the rooms. 2, you can go where I can't, inside the walls, up the chimneys, under the floors. We must use both." Sydney nodded, impressed. "A pincer movement, very wise." "A what movement?" Mindy asked. "It means we go at the mystery from 2 sides at once." Stanley said proudly. "We're not attacking anything," Beatrix said gently. "We're investigating, carefully." "Exactly," Mary agreed. "So here's what we'll do." She picked up a piece of charcoal. "I'll go into the west wing and draw a map of the main rooms. I'll mark the places where you said the sounds were loudest." She drew a rough square. "This is the long gallery. Poppy said the moan was strongest near the big fireplace here." She made a large X at one end of the square. "Then," she went on, "you will make your own map inside the walls. You know your secret passages best. You must find which tunnels and mouse runs lead to those same spots." Poppy's eyes lit up. "We can. We know the routes to most of the rooms. We can draw our map right next to yours." Beatrix brought a smaller scrap of paper from the edge of one of Mary's drawings. Using a sharpened twig dipped in berry juice, Poppy began to sketch the Wickling world. Narrow paths behind the plaster, tall climbs along chimney stacks, tight squeezes between floor joists. It was a little maze of secrets. "The most important part," Mary whispered, "is how we talk to each other. If I'm in a room and you're in the wall, how will you hear me?" They thought. Whistling was too obvious. Tapping was best, but they needed a code. "What about this?" Stanley said, tapping a neat rhythm on the floor. "Tap, tap, pause, tap. That can mean I'm here or all is well." "And a faster tapping," Poppy added, "tap, tap, 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 can mean danger or come quickly." "Perfect," Mary said. "And if I need your attention from a room, I'll scratch the wall with my fingernail near the fireplace or the skirting board. You'll know it's me." They practiced the signals. Soft taps echoed in the attic. Mindy and Mandy tried again and again until they knew the rhythms by heart. It felt like a new game. "Now, for the investigation itself," Sydney said, taking charge. "We'll work in teams. Safety in numbers. Stanley, you'll come with me. We'll take the lower routes and look under the floorboards where the footsteps were heard. Poppy, you have the sharpest eyes. You will go with Mary, watching from inside the walls while she explores the rooms. You can be our lookout and tap signals to her." Poppy nodded, feeling very important. "What about us?" Mindy asked, worried she'd been left out. "You two," Beatrix said, putting her arms around the twins. "Let have the most important job of all. You will be the base camp commanders. You'll stay here and keep everything ready. And you will listen. If you hear any strange noises up here, you'll note the time. That will help us fit the puzzle together." The twins brightened at once. Being base camp commanders sounded grand. For the next hour, the attic buzzed with quiet, careful work. Mary drew her map, sketching the long gallery, the morning room, and the grand staircase of the west wing. She marked the X for the fireplace and another for the room below the attic. Chapter 5. The Search Begins. The next afternoon, Pomfret Hall was quiet. Lord and Lady Pomfret were busy with letters. Sebastian was, as usual, dozing in the library, and Julian kept well away from the west wing. It was the perfect time to begin. Mary felt a flutter of excitement and nerves as she stood before the heavy oak door. The large iron key was cold and heavy in her hand. She took a deep breath and turned it in the lock. The click sounded loud in the still hallway. She pushed the door, and a wave of cold, still air, smelling of dust and old wood, rolled over her. High above, the Wicklings were ready. Sydney and Stanley prepared to climb down into the depths of the walls, while Poppy took her place at a tiny peephole that looked into the long gallery from inside the wainscoting. Mindy and Mandy, the base camp commanders, sat by their small listening post, a knothole that led to the West Wing staircase, their faces serious with duty. Mary stepped into the West Wing entrance hall. It felt like a forgotten world. White sheets covered everything, chairs, tables, even a grand piano, so the shapes looked strange and ghostly in the dim light behind the heavy curtains. Dust motes floated in the few sunbeams that slipped through. Her footsteps on the bare floorboards were the only sound, each one seeming to echo for miles. She unrolled her map. "First, the long gallery," she whispered, her voice tiny in the big space. As Mary moved carefully into the long, narrow room, Poppy followed her from within the walls. It was like a secret game of follow the leader. Poppy heard the creak of a floorboard from Mary, then scrambled along her hidden path to a new peephole to watch her friend step into another patch of dusty sunlight. From Poppy's tiny view, Mary looked like a giant walking through sheet-draped mountains. Mary reached the huge fireplace at the end of the gallery. It was gray marble with a heavy carved wooden screen in front. This was the first on the map. She stood very still and listened. The house was silent. Inside the wall, Poppy listened too, ears straining. She heard only Mary's soft breathing. Poppy gave the all-clear signal. Tap, tap, pause, tap on the inside of the wall. Mary heard the faint taps and smiled. She wasn't alone. She ran her fingers over the marble. It was cold. She peered up into the dark chimney. Nothing but darkness. "Nothing here," Mary murmured, a little disappointed. She made a small note on her map. At the same time, Sydney and Stanley were on their mission below. They had climbed down through the walls into the space under the floorboards of the room directly beneath the Wicklings' attic, the second X. It was dark and cobwebby, with a dry smell of soil and old stone. Their only light was Sydney's foxfire moss lantern, which threw long, dancing shadows. Creak! A floorboard groaned right above their heads. They froze. It was the exact sound from the other night, but now they were underneath it. Stanley looked up, eyes wide. The sound wasn't a footstep at all. It was the slow settling of an old wooden beam, bending as the air grew warmer or cooler. He tapped his father's arm and pointed. No phantom, just ancient, tired wood. Back in the long gallery, Mary was about to move on when a sudden gust of wind outside made the whole wing groan. Then she heard it, faint but clear, a low, sad sound. Ooh! It seemed to come from the chimney. Mary's heart beat faster. She leaned closer to the fireplace and scratched the wooden screen with her fingernail. Poppy, inside the wall, heard the moan and the scratch. She quickly tapped the signal for "I hear it too!" Tap, 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 tap! Mary and Poppy stayed very still for a long moment, listening. The sound did not come again. But the search had truly begun. They had learned that the moan was linked to the fireplace, and Sydney and Stanley had found the truth behind the footsteps. They hadn't found a phantom, but they had found clues. The mystery was starting to give up its secrets, one careful step at a time. Next to Mary's map, Poppy's berry juice map grew more detailed, a spiderweb of lines that matched Mary's rooms. It was wonderful to see. 2 maps of the same place, one of big open spaces and one of tiny hidden paths, lying side by side. At last, the plan was complete. They had their maps, they had their signals, they had their teams. Mary looked at the Wicklings, her heart full of pride. They were no longer frightened by a spooky noise. They were a team of explorers, a band of detectives ready to solve a mystery. "Tomorrow," Mary said, rolling up her map with a quick, brave flick. "Tomorrow, we begin our ghost hunt." A warm, bold feeling settled over them all. The Phantom of the West Wing had no idea what was coming. Chapter 6, A Clue in the Library. The finding in the long gallery that the moan came from the chimney was a big step forward, but it also made new questions. What inside a chimney could make such a sad sound? Mary and the Wicklings spent the rest of the day talking it over. "Maybe a bit of metal swinging in the wind," Sydney said back in the safe, warm attic. "But it wasn't windy today," Poppy replied sensibly. "And we still heard it. Perhaps it's a trapped bird?" Stanley said, though he didn't sound sure. A very big, very sad-sounding bird? The mystery felt deeper than ever. They needed more facts. The next day, Mary tried a new idea. If the sound came from a chimney, maybe a book could help. The big library, with its very tall shelves, Must have books about birds or how houses are built or even the history of Pomfret Hall. Mary spent the morning in the library, pulling down heavy books. She looked at drawings of different birds, but the calls of owls, doves, and ravens didn't match the long, low moan they had heard. She was so busy that she didn't notice Julian come in. "Looking for ghost stories, little sister?" he sneered, peering at the book on British birds. "No," Mary said, shutting the book a bit too fast. "I'm just interested in birds." "Well, the only bird you need to worry about is the Phantom of Pomfret," Julian said, puffing out his chest. "I've done more research. The stable boy says the ghost is really a lost stable hand who—" "Thank you, Julian," Mary cut in, not wanting to hear another made-up tale. She gathered her books and left, her mind whirring. Julian's silly talk had given her an idea by accident. What if it was a bird, but not a usual one? A big bird, one that liked old, quiet places. Meanwhile, the Wicklings were doing their own research. While Mary was in the library, Poppy had a bold thought. The West Wing library shared a wall with the main library. What if they could look at the chimney from the other side? Sydney agreed it was worth trying. While Mary kept Julian busy, Sydney, Stanley, and Poppy followed their hidden paths until they found a small, mouse-sized opening into the closed West Wing library. It was even dustier and quieter than the long gallery. Books stood like forgotten soldiers on the shelves, their spines faded by years of sun. They hurried across the wide, dusty carpet to the great marble fireplace, a twin to the one in the long gallery. This one had an old fire screen made of woven metal. "Boost me up," Poppy whispered. Stanley made a step with his hands. Poppy climbed to his shoulders, then onto the mantel. From there, she could peer into the dark, sooty mouth of the chimney, a tall black brick tunnel stretching into night. She couldn't see much, but the smell was different, not just soot and old ash. There was a wild, musky smell. Then she saw it. Caught on a rough brick edge at the very rim of the fireplace was a small, soft, white feather. Downy, like the kind that lies close to a bird's skin to keep it warm. Poppy's heart leaped. She carefully plucked it free. "What is it?" Sydney called softly. Poppy climbed down, eyes shining. She held out the feather on her palm. "A clue," she whispered. "It was stuck on the bricks, and it smells like outdoors, like an animal." Back in the main house, Mary had found what she needed. In a big, illustrated book called A Natural History of English Birds, a picture made her gasp. A barn owl, heart-shaped white face, dark, knowing eyes. The book said its call wasn't a hoot at all, but a long, drawn-out, eerie shriek, a sound that could easily be mistaken for a ghostly moan in the middle of the night. Just then, the secret scratching sounded at her bedroom wall. Mary rushed to the loose panel and slid it back. Poppy stood there, holding out the tiny white feather. "We found this," Poppy said, out of breath. "In the library fireplace." Mary took the feather, soft and pure white. She looked from it to the barn owl picture in the book. The clues were fitting together. The moan was not a ghost. It was an owl. A family of owls must have nested in the chimney. But what about the clattering sound? An owl wouldn't make a metal rattle. One piece of the puzzle was still missing. Even so, they were closer than ever. They had a real clue and a strong idea. The phantom was looking less and less like a phantom by the minute. Chapter 7. The Chimney Investigation. Finding the feather was like finding the first piece of a jigsaw. It was a real clue, one that pointed away from ghosts and towards something alive. But good detectives need more than one clue. They need proof. "An owl makes sense for the moaning sound," Mary said, looking at the feather in her palm. "But what about the clattering? And we still need to be sure." "The only way to be sure," Stanley said, his voice firm, "is to see the nest for ourselves." This would be the riskiest part of the plan. Checking the chimneys meant climbing straight up a dark, sooty shaft that might not be safe. Only the bravest, quickest climbers could try it. "Stanley and I will go," Poppy said before anyone could argue. "I'm light, and I have sharp eyes. Stanley is the best climber." Sydney and Beatrix shared a worried look. They knew the children were right and very capable. After a long moment, Sydney nodded. "Very well. Take the strongest rope. Go only a little way. If it seems unsafe, turn back at once. Is that understood?" Stanley and Poppy nodded, serious as soldiers. Getting ready felt like packing for a grand trip. Beatrix tied handkerchiefs over their noses and mouths to keep out soot. Sidney checked every knot in their best rope, which he fixed to a strong nail deep in the wall near the base of the chimney stack in the West Wing library. Poppy would go first, with the small foxfire lantern tied to her belt. Stanley would follow with a sack to bring back any proof. Poppy took a deep breath and stepped out of the hole in the wall into the wide, dark mouth of the library fireplace. It was like a cave stretching up into the sky. The air was cold and smelled of soot and that wild, musky scent. The brick sides were rough, good for hands and feet, but black with years of ash. Tap, tap, tap. Poppy began to climb, finding tiny cracks and ledges. Stanley followed a little below. The only light was the soft, greenish glow from the lantern. It made the soot sparkle like black stars. Up and up they went until the fireplace below was just a small square of dim light. After what felt like forever, Poppy's hand touched something new. Not hard brick, but a tangle of dry sticks, soft feathers, and other bits. She had reached the nest. "Stanley," she whispered through her handkerchief. "I've found it." Stanley climbed beside her. The nest was huge, built on a wide ledge where the chimney narrowed. It was a messy heap of twigs, straw, and dry leaves. But what lay inside made them both gasp. Mixed with the feathers and twigs were the things that made the clatter. Old, dried bones, likely from mice and voles the owls had eaten. And there, dull in the lantern light, sat a small silver spoon, dark with age, a broken brass button, and a thin, rusty strip of metal that looked as if it had come from a weather vane. When the wind blew hard down the chimney, these treasures must have rattled together and made the strange sound. Then a soft rustle came from the middle of the nest. Poppy held the lantern closer. There, tucked into the down, were 3 fluffy white owlets. They were fast asleep, beaks under wings, peaceful and not ghostly at all. "It's a family," Poppy breathed, her heart melting. "It's not a phantom. It's a mother, a father, and their babies." The mystery was solved, completely. The moans were the barn owl's calls. The clattering came from their collection of shiny bits in the nest. The phantom of the West Wing was really a beautiful Bramley who had found a safe, quiet home. Carefully, so they didn't wake the owlets, Poppy picked up the rusty metal piece and the brass button and slipped them into Stanley's sack. These would be their proof. Climbing down was much quicker. Their faces were smudged with soot, but their eyes shone with triumph as they slipped back through the hole into the wall. "Well?" Sidney and Beatrix asked, hurrying to them. Poppy held up the sack. "We found the phantom," Stanley said with a grin, "and it's got feathers." They showed the evidence and told of the sleeping owlets. All the fear of the last few days melted away and turned into wonder. The West Wing wasn't haunted. It was a sanctuary. Chapter 8, The Midnight Watch. The chimney clues, a rusty strip of metal and a brass button, were clear. But Mary and the Wicklings were careful detectives. They wanted to see the mystery happen from the moan to the clatter with their own eyes and ears. They chose to hold a midnight watch. "We must be completely silent," Mary said that evening in the attic. "We need to see the owls come and go and hear what happens when the wind blows." "It's the only way to be sure," Poppy agreed. The thought of being in the West Wing at midnight made her shiver, this time with excitement, not fear. Their plan was simple but bold. After the house fell asleep, Mary would sneak from her room with a warm blanket and hide in the long gallery near the fireplace. The Wicklings would already be in place, watching from their secret peepholes inside the walls. They would be Mary's eyes and ears in the dark. That night, a thin moon hung in the sky, laying long, pale shadows across the floors. Mary waited until the last servant went to bed. Only the tick-tock of the grand clock sounded. Wrapping a dark cloak around her shoulders, she slipped from her room, her heart beating louder than the clock. No one met her on the stairs. The house slept like a gentle giant. She unlocked the West Wing door. The click of the key sounded very loud in the deep quiet, and she slipped inside. At night, the West Wing felt like a different world. Sheet-draped furniture turned into big, spooky shapes. Every tiny creak made Mary jump. She tiptoed to the long gallery and curled into a tall, high-backed armchair hidden under a dust sheet. With the blanket over her head, she became just another shadow. She was hidden. Inside the wall, Sidney, Stanley, and Poppy were already at their posts. They didn't worry about being seen. They were part of the house itself. Poppy had the best view, her eye pressed to a crack that looked straight at the chimney breast. They waited. Only the soft whisper of the wind could be heard. Nothing happened for a long time. Mary's eyes grew heavy. The Wicklings began to wonder if the owls had gone. Then it came a soft sound from above. Wings. A faint whoosh whoosh in the chimney. Poppy tapped the signal. Tap, tap, tap. I hear something. Mary woke with a start and listened hard. A pale shape dropped silently out of the chimney and landed on the wooden fire screen. A barn owl, still and silver white in the moonlight, its heart-shaped face turned, great dark eyes searching the room. It was the most beautiful thing Mary had ever seen. Not a ghost at all, but a living, wild creature. After a moment, the owl lifted off and slipped through a broken pane high in the window to hunt in the fields. The wind rose outside, whistling around the corner of the house. It caught the broken shutter on the outer wall. Clatter, clatter, clatter! The sound was exact, the loose shutter rattling in the wind. From high in the chimney came the sound they had waited for, a low, drawn-out call sliding down the sooty flue. Ooh! It was the mother owl, calling softly to her mate. Eerie, yes. But now that they knew the truth, it was also gentle and calm. It was a family speaking in the dark. Mary smiled into the shadows. The mystery was solved. The phantom was real, but it had feathers. From inside the wall came a quick flutter of taps, the Wicklings' signal for joy and success. They waited a little longer, watching moonbeams move across the floor and listening to the soft rustle from the chimney as the owlets turned in their sleep. The West Wing no longer felt scary. It felt like a secret garden, a safe home for a wild family. When Mary finally crept back to her warm bed, she carried a wonderful secret, not fear. She knew the truth, and it was far more magical than any ghost story. Chapter 9. The Ghost Revealed. The morning after the midnight watch, sunlight streamed into Mary's bedroom. It felt warmer and brighter than ever. She woke with a wonderful certainty. The mystery was solved. The phantom was a family of beautiful barn owls, and the clattering was just a loose shutter. It was time to share the news. Her first thought was to tell the Wicklings. She found them in the attic, buzzing with the same excited energy. They had already set out the evidence on a clean leaf, the white feather, the rusty metal, and the brass button. "Did you see it, Mary?" Poppy asked, eyes shining. "Wasn't it magnificent?" "It was," Mary said, smiling wide. "It was better than a ghost. It was real." They spent a happy hour going over every detail of their watch, from the owl's silent flight to the exact sound of the clattering shutter. They were no longer ghost hunters. They were naturalists, keepers of a wonderful secret. "Now we have to tell everyone," Stanley said, puffing out his chest. "We have to show Julian that he was wrong. There is no ghost." Mary's smile faded a little. A new thought was forming. She looked at the evidence, then at her tiny friends' glad faces. "Do we?" she asked quietly. The Wicklings stared, puzzled. "Tell everyone, Mary said. "Think about it. If we tell the truth, what will happen?" Poppy thought. "Well, Julian will look silly." "Yes, he will," Mary said. "But he won't like that. And what will the grown-ups do when they learn there are owls in the chimney?" Sydney's face grew thoughtful. "They might try to get them out. They'll say the chimney is dirty, or the owls are a nuisance. They might even call a man to remove the nest." Silence filled the attic. The picture of the fluffy, sleeping owlets floated into all their minds. The owls had found a safe, quiet home. The West Wing was perfect because no one ever went there. "And if the owls are gone," Beatrix added softly, "what happens to the West Wing?" Stanley's shoulders sank as he understood. Julian wouldn't be scared anymore. He might decide to use it again. He could come poking around whenever he likes. The wonderful truth they had found suddenly felt fragile. Telling everyone would spoil everything. It would disturb the owls and put the Wicklings' secret home at risk. Their safety depended on the West Wing staying forgotten and unused. "The ghost is actually very useful," Poppy said slowly. Mary nodded. "Exactly. The Pomfret Phantom is our best protector. As long as Julian and everyone else believe the wing is haunted, they'll stay away. The owls will be safe. And you will be safe." It was a clever, if slightly cheeky plan. They would not reveal the truth. They would guard it. Later that day, Mary found Julian in the garden, not trying to skip stones on the frozen edge of the pond. I heard the ghost again last night, Julian, Mary said, sounding impressed. Julian spun around, eyes wide. You did? You went in there? After I forbade it. I was ever so brave, Mary said, hand to her chest. I saw a pale, shimmering shape by the fireplace. It was so cold. You were right. It's definitely haunted. Julian stared, mouth open. He had hoped she would argue so he could boast. Her agreement knocked him off balance. Well, of course it is, he spluttered, recovering. I told you. You must never go in there. It's not safe for a girl. I won't, Mary promised solemnly. I'll never go in again. It's far too scary. She walked away, leaving a confused but very proud Julian. He now had a witness to his ghost story. The legend of the Pomfret Phantom was safe. Back in the attic, Mary told the Wicklings, and they laughed. The ghost had been revealed. But only to them. And once revealed, it had become their silent guardian. The mystery was solved, and the secret was safe. And that, they all agreed, was the very best kind of ending. Chapter 10, A Useful Ghost. A week passed, and a new, comfortable routine settled over the west wing of Pomfret Hall. The sounds came each night, the owl's low moan and the occasional clatter of the shutter, but they no longer seemed scary to Mary or the Wicklings. Now the noises were like a bedtime song, a sign that all was well in their secret world. One afternoon, Mary came to the attic with a small cloth bundle. I brought a thank you present, she said, unfolding the cloth to show a few bits of leftover sausage from her lunch. The Wicklings gathered close, eyes shining. It was a rare treat. A thank you? Sydney asked. For what, my dear? For the Phantom, Mary said with a grin. He's the best thing that's ever happened to this part of the house. She was right. The legend of the Pomfret Phantom had grown and spread, all thanks to Julian. He told the story to anyone who would listen, adding more and more dramatic details each time. He even stood far across the lawn, peering up at the West Wing windows and claiming he saw flickering lights. The servants kept well away, and Lord and Lady Pomfret were simply glad Julian had found a hobby that stopped him pestering them for money. This meant the West Wing was now the quietest, most private place on the whole estate. And the Wicklings made the most of it. With Mary's help, they began a new project. Since they no longer feared the sounds from below, they started to explore the empty rooms, no longer as scared detectives, but as curious adventurers. They weren't just living in the attic anymore. The whole wing was becoming an extension of their home. Poppy found a treasure trove in an old sewing basket in a cupboard, brightly colored spools of thread that became rolls of fabric for them. A lost silver thimble made the perfect washing cauldron. A jet-black button became a grand ceremonial shield for Stanley. The twins, Mindy and Mandy, claimed the dusty, sheet-draped drawing room as their playground. They called the draped chairs the White Mountains and spent hours playing hide-and-seek among the folds, their laughter echoing softly in the empty room. Best of all, the owls were thriving. From their high hiding places, the Wicklings watched the parents come and go, bringing food to the growing owlets. They even gave them names. The father was Silas, the mother was Willow, and the three owlets were Pip, Squeak, and Wilfred. That ghost, Beatrix said, stirring a pot of soup that now had a bit of sausage in it, has given us more than safety. It's given us freedom. Sydney nodded, looking around at his happy family. It's funny, isn't it? We were so frightened of the unknown, but once we faced it, we found friends and a bigger home. That evening, as the sun set and the first owl call slid down the chimney, Mary sat with the Wicklings in their attic. They weren't hiding from the sound. They were listening to it, like neighbors enjoying a familiar evening song. You know, Mary said softly, I think this is better than if there'd been no mystery at all. How so? Poppy asked. Because now we have a secret that protects us, Mary said. And we have a story. The best stories aren't simple. They're about mysteries solved and fears faced. The Wicklings all agreed. The Phantom had brought them together in a new way. It had tested their courage and rewarded them with a secret kingdom. As Mary slipped back to the main house, she felt deeply content. The West Wing was no longer a dark, haunted place. It was a safe place, guarded by a useful ghost that lived only in the imagination of a proud boy. It was a place of soft owl calls, playful twins, hidden treasures, and a friendship that had proved itself braver than any fear. And in the quiet, Moonlit attic? The Wicklings went to sleep, listening to the gentle sounds of their owl neighbors and the wind rattling the shutter. The sounds that once frightened them now sang them to sleep, a soft reminder that they were safe, they were home, and their world held more magic than any ghost story ever could.
This was The Wicklings and the Ghost of the West Wing, written by Beryl Coops.
This was one of the books in this series of stories about the little folk, the Wicklings. If you enjoyed this short story, please check out the playlist under the family, comedy, humor, and feel-good title on my YouTube channel for more like this.
I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.